Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is time for another true crime video yet again, and today we will be talking about Sydney Loofe, the woman who was murdered by her Tinder date. Sydney Loofe was born on August 21st, 1993 in Nebraska. She was the daughter of George and Susie Loofe and had a very normal upbringing. The Loofe family would move around in different towns, but ultimately, Sydney spent her entire life in Nebraska. She grew up very much into sports with golf, basketball, and fishing as her main hobbies. However, she would only stick to fishing after getting diagnosed with scoliosis back when she was in high school. Aside from sports and other outdoor activities, Sydney also loved animals and had a passion for helping them out. Sydney was described by the people around her to be extremely kind, compassionate, and giving. She never hesitated on lending a helping hand on whoever needed it. However, despite this, Sydney was fighting her own demons, at least internally. After graduating from high school, she moved out of her parents' house and got an apartment where she lived with her cat. She started working at her local Maynard's where she became a store clerk. However, Sydney wasn't really happy with the life that she was living. She struggled with her mental health and was eventually diagnosed with depression as well. At this point in her life, she had no idea what she wanted to do in terms of her career, and aside from this, she was also quite lonely and was longing for someone romantically. Sydney was attracted to women and found her situation a bit difficult as she lived in Nebraska. So, sometime in 2017, she finally decided to create an account on Tinder, a dating app. On November 2017, she matched with a woman named Audrey, and the two started connecting. They soon found out that they had the same interests and hobbies and really hit it off from the get go. After talking for days, they finally decided to go for their first date on November 14th, and this turned out to be very successful. In fact, they had planned to meet up again the very next day. However, after this date on November 15th, no one would ever hear from Sydney Loofe ever again. The following morning, November 16th, she failed to show up for work. And it was very out of character for Sydney to miss work, especially without prior notice. Her colleagues tried contacting her, but the calls would go straight to voicemail. Worried, one of her co-workers got in contact with her parents, George and Susie, only to find out that they hadn't heard from her either, and the last time anyone has ever spoken to her was the night prior at around 7 p.m. By the afternoon of November 16th, Sydney Loofe was reported as missing. 2 days later, on the 18th, the police went to her apartment for a welfare check, and what they saw worried them and the Loofes even further. They found her vehicle parked on the driveway, and when they got inside the apartment, they saw that her glasses and her purse were still in there. These were things that Sydney would never leave the house without. And aside from that, her cat, whom she loved so dearly, seemed like he hadn't been fed for days. Law enforcement also checked Sydney's cell phone records, and it showed that her phone had actually pinged twice around a residential area. And upon checking her social media records, the authorities saw a potential lead. Just hours before Sydney disappeared, she posted a photo on Snapchat saying that she was getting ready for a date. And luckily, her friend Brooklyn knew about this too. However, all that Brooklyn knew was that Sydney was going out with a woman named Audrey and that she had met this woman on Tinder. Sydney also showed Brooklyn a photo of this Audrey, and she knew that what she looked like. So Brooklyn herself created a Tinder account and kept on scrolling until she found Audrey. She swiped right, and just a few minutes later, Audrey swiped right back. The two started talking and exchanged numbers, and after this, Brooklyn gave Audrey's number to the police right away, and through this, the authorities were able to find out so much more. Turns out, Audrey's real name was Bailey Boswell, and the last two pings from Sydney's phone were actually located near her flat. Now, upon looking into her further, law enforcement were able to determine that she was co-renting this flat with a man named Aubrey Trail. So, and as this could get confusing, from now on, I will be referring to Audrey, the girl, as Bailey. So, Aubrey Trail turned out to be Bailey's actual partner. Bailey grew up in Iowa and had a very good upbringing. However, she found herself hanging out with the wrong crowd, and it all just went downhill from there. She then met Aubrey via Backpage, a website where people could promote their sex work. It's actually my first time hearing about this website. However, Bailey signed up to look for a sugar daddy, and she got a sugar daddy vampire instead. And of course, this sugar daddy vampire was Aubrey Trail, Bailey's current partner. I'm getting confused as well. Now, Aubrey was at this point pretty well known to the authorities, as he had always had trouble with the law starting from the late 1990s. He had records of fraud, theft, and even trafficking. He was also a cult leader who referred to himself as Sugar Daddy Vampire, while Bailey was his queen witch. Very cringy, very weird. But according to Aubrey, his members were all women on his payroll. He refers to these women as witches and would pay them $200 a week as long as they abide to his rules. Now, these rules were: one, they were not allowed to have any form of communication with other men outside of their families. Two, they needed to get in contact with him at least once every 3 hours and give him updates on their whereabouts. And three, they were to refer to him as daddy and nothing else. Now, apparently, this had been going on for some time already, and these rules and nicknames are pretty gross and cringy. However, by 2017, things in this cult escalated and just got creepier. For their new recruits, they had new rules and regulations. New members would have to breathe in someone's last breath to be able to qualify as a witch, meaning in order to secure a spot of their own in this cult, they would have to take someone else's life. Now, aside from all of this creepiness, Aubry and Bailey were also under court order to pay $400,000 over a fraud that they had committed in Kansas. On November 19th, a search warrant was obtained, and upon visiting their apartment, the two were nowhere to be found. However, the investigators did note that it seemed like the walls in the apartment had been thoroughly wiped down, and the stench of bleach was just reeking from everywhere. So this was very, very suspicious. Law enforcement also spoke to Aubry and Bailey's landlord, and he too complained of the smell of bleach, saying that it was so strong a few days prior that it actually caused some of his other tenants to get sick and break out in hives. The police also obtained CCTV footages from different business establishments. On November 14th, the day of Sydney and Bailey's first date, Aubry and Bailey were seen checking in at a hotel near Sydney's workplace. The next day, the two were spotted at a Home Depot purchasing a 12-inch hacksaw, gallons of bleach, large trash bags, and a utility knife with replacement blades. This was the afternoon before their second date, aka the day that Sydney went missing. That same day, just a few minutes later, just a few minutes after their Home Depot run, Aubry and Bailey actually went to Maynard's, Sydney's place of work. But I think it was only Aubry who went into the store. And coincidentally, he actually passed by Sydney as he was walking in. And what the heck was he doing there? He was just at Home Depot's. Why was he at Maynard's? He was there to get air fresheners, drain cleaner, and a few lighters. And later that day, him and Bailey were seen yet again at an antique mall purchasing food grinders, a weed cutter, and a folding saw. So these were indeed very suspicious purchases, and the fact that they just went on the run alerted the authorities even further. And on November 28th, 13 days after Sydney's disappearance, Aubry Trail and Bailey Boswell were declared as official persons of interest. And almost right after this was announced by the police, the two suddenly showed up on Facebook where they uploaded a video professing their innocence and showing support for the search of Sydney. However, it was clear as day that they were only doing this to try and maintain their innocence. 2 days later, on November 30th, the two were actually finally tracked down in a motel in Missouri and were taken into custody. And at the time, there was no concrete proof of them being involved in Sydney's disappearance, so they were arrested and held for fraud charges instead. Upon searching the motel room that they checked into, police found maps, sleeping pills, hiking shoes, and a written note on how they planned to escape to Mexico. Their devices were also confiscated and checked by the FBI, which led law enforcement to visit 16 possible crime scenes, all of which contained incriminating evidence against the pair. Police found clothes, bloodied supplies, old sheets, and sadly cut up body parts, which were soon confirmed to be of Sydney's. Sydney Loofe was only 24 years old. The investigators found 13 parts of her in total, but one part, I don't know which, was never found. She was placed in different trash bags and was discarded in different ditches around an hour away from Aubry and Bailey's shared apartment. On December 11th, 2017, a private funeral attended by friends and family was held for Sydney. In the next few months, Aubry would make a number of statements. However, his version of events were very inconsistent and he would often change the details of his story. But his main premise was that he, Sydney, and Bailey had consensual sex and he accidentally killed Sydney by choking her a bit too hard. But of course, based on the evidence piled up against him and Bailey, none of his version of events added up. And based on the CCTV footages where they were seen buying supplies and different types of weapons, law enforcement were sure that this was a premeditated murder. On June 2018, Aubry Trail and Bailey Boswell were both charged with first-degree murder and the improper disposal of human remains, to which they both pleaded not guilty. During the same trial, a few of Aubry's witches also came forward to testify against him and Bailey, telling everyone in the courtroom of the awful things that they were made to do. And just before another witness was about to take a stand, Aubry suddenly shouted out, "Bailey's innocent," before taking a sharp object and jabbing it into his own throat. He was brought to the hospital and made a full recovery. However, he could not run from the crimes that he had committed. Aubry Trail and Bailey Boswell were both found guilty on the following charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the improper disposal of human remains. On November 2021, Bailey Boswell was charged to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while her partner Aubry Trail was sentenced to death by lethal injection. They are both still incarcerated, separately of course, and to this day, Aubry Trail is on death row awaiting his death. And this was pretty intense, honestly. Now I'm scared to use dating apps. However, that is all the information that I have on this case. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, and should there be any other case that you would like for me to cover on this channel, please let me know by leaving a comment. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on my next video.